Welcome, everyone. This is Tristan McGough, your philosopher at large, and today we're continuing with our series on Selfology 101. This is actually the fifth episode in our series, and this treats the fourth idea, an intuitive idea, which we all have as a pristine cognition, that is, as the base of our consciousness, before we even have self-consciousness or other consciousness, that is, of the finite things around us or internally within our own mental milieu. So today, we are going to be dealing with the self as the whole. That is, it's all-including. And that all-inclusiveness takes into account everything from the infinitely large to the infinitesimally small. And we divide that in terms of the tribhava into the tricosm. That is the three aspects. There's the macrocosmic being, take the universe as a whole. That's macrocosmic being, as far as we're concerned, manifestationally on this material realm, which is, of course, the core of what we will be talking about here in terms of cosmology and cosmogenesis. That is, how does the cosmos originate? How does creation come about? And we'll be dealing with the self as the cosmos, because to explain or understand that is something that allows you to see the full, that takes into account everything in the macrocosmic aspect of the world, that is, the all-containing aspect as far as it reaches. And then, of course, the microcosmic aspect, which each of us as persons find representative of. In fact, it's probably the best and easiest representation of what a microcosm is, because it is something that allows you as an individual mind to generate even the thought about that mind. That self-generating capacity, that reflexivity, is inherent, and it's part of the intrinsic nature of cognition. But of course, we all see the world according to a pre-established arrangement, if you will, a noetic latus, a hypostasis, or that which stands under everything that occurs. And these we've formulated into the 7 intuitive ideas which arise naturally as pristine cognitions within each of our consciousness, even though we may not be attentively aware of it in our liminal consciousness, in which we pay particular attention to a specific object at a definite time of which we are aware. We call that apprehension, do we not? I'm able to apprehend internal objects such as an emotion. You do that regularly whenever you call attention even to a feeling of yourself. That's internal reflexivity. That's part of the immanent activity of psychical being that we've called the soul or the mind or the psyche. That second aspect to the trigonic self, including spirit or pure consciousness, and soma, which is your finite consciousness of all the definite things that happen in your environment, internally and externally. But besides the macrocosm, besides the whole, and the individuated parts that constitute the whole and that reflect the whole, those parts themselves, those microcosms, have constituent bases or elements of which they themselves are constituted. These are minicosms. Take, for example, the human body. The human body as an organism is something that is constituted of cells, and every one of those cells participate in vivacience or life. And those who have an omnis point of view look and think of cellular life as not only imbued with vivacience, this life force, but it also has sentience. It has the ability to feel. Not only that, it has an intelligence, perhaps an intelligence we cannot readily define at this point, but minacosmically speaking, it has intelligence. So it also has conscience. That is, it has the ability to formulate stable patterns of predispositional behavior that predetermines what is going to occur within a certain respect, a certain aspect, and that aspect is the body. So you take a look and you see that every individual microcosmic body is part of a great macrocosmic whole. And not only is it part of that whole, but it is constituted of parts itself. Some of these are formed in the systems and organs which are, of course, studied anatomically and divided up for medical science in terms of treatment to even improve the constitution of the body by paying particular attention to the cell, and then even at a microscopic level where you are looking at the biochemical arrangements of molecules that are part of the organism. So today, when we are dealing with the cosmos, we're talking about how reality is in itself. Just before we treated reality, we looked at the self and said, well, it's that which is real. And we looked at reality. We found it was constituted of four ingredients. There was pure being, by which everything, whether material or immaterial, is constituted. It has finite being, by which these things are divided up from the macrocosm itself as the total one, down to its individuated microcosmic parts, and then even further down minacosmically speaking. There's a hierarchy, if you will, of being as it translates reality into the existence. Now we're talking here from moving from pure being, which is carved up by non-being, through the agency of conscious being in order to create finite being. And that was the general formula of reality. Being, non-being, finite being, and conscious being. Those four ingredients constitute and give us reality. So today what we are going to deal with is how that reality manifests as creation, as Maya, as that which was unlimited becomes the limited, that which is universal becomes the particular, that which is general becomes the specific, that which is the potential becomes the actual world in which we live. So, as a preliminary, we're going to look at the self as the whole, that is, as Purna, this fullness that is constituted of the tricosm, of the macrocosm, the microcosm, and the minacosm. First of all, we'll look at what Chuang Tzu says. The universe and I were born together. All things are only one thing. We've got to understand that anything in the finite world, anything in any kind of world in which specificity can be articulated, and that's even in the mathematical world, in the notational world of pure symbols and of the mathematical arrangements that are constituted thereof. Mathematics and everything that has been found in it, and everything that can be found in it and will be found in it or never be found in it in terms of the actual determination of the number pi, at least by finite means. At least by finite means. It doesn't mean that pi is unconstituted in terms of being an immaterial reality. Better word is transmaterial. Because the transmateriality of reality means nothing more than how that which is invisible and infinite and potential becomes that which is particular and concrete and actual. So first of all, I want to remind you what we're talking about. Let's look at our map of the omniverse, and we're dealing only with our universe today. We're dealing with only our universe, and that is this blue element. In terms of the paraverse, in infinite potential, you can think of it as always emergent without diminution. There's no diminishment of the paraverse. The paraverse, as pure potentiality, is inexhaustible. This, in the Eastern tradition, is called para-Brahman. It's one without a second. It's undividable being. So when we're talking about the paraverse, and I've represented that by these arrows that are stretching actually infinitely every which way. Right, it's like the center, there is no center, and that's noted there. There's no center, there's no circumference. With the paraverse, you're not thinking in finite terms, you're not even thinking in transfinite terms, you're thinking in infinite terms. So when we're talking about the universe here as part of the triverse, the paraverse is all which in other universes as well as our own are established as the multiverse. We are looking at our own universe, which is held together by a unique set of principles and laws that apply and give us causal specificity as entities in space and time. So what we're actually engaged in as a universe is a continuum of entities, causes, times, and spaces. It's a space-time entity-cause continuum. As I referenced, if we look at the aeonocosms in terms of the tricosm, we have here the macrocosm, the microcosm, and the minicosm. And in terms of the identity of all of these, every single cosm has a self-identity. That identity, as identity, however, is not something which is dividable. That we'll deal with at another time when we're going to consider in our next episode the self as cognos, as consciousness, as the mind, as the person, constituted of everything we're talking about at a microcosmic level that can be studied as a cognitive entirety called the human being. We'll end on that note today, and we'll pick it up then. But what I wish to note at this point is it doesn't matter whether on the macrocosmic level, the microcosmic level, or the minicosmic level, there is the capacity for thinking, willing, feeling, and doing. You have to understand that if you were to use a Gedanken experiment, a thought experiment, and you imagine the physicist singularity at the beginning of the universe, before the Big Bang, infinite density, infinitesimally small, able to expand to infinity. And everything is potentially contained within that single pre-manifestational protile, including my words, including all that you see around you, including every single note that will ever be created in a musical composition, every thought that's going to be thought by any mind that exists now, has existed, or ever will exist. All of that energy is miraculously contained pre-Maya in that singular protile. If you will, that aeonic atom. And then it explodes. And on the way of exploding, as it approaches infinity, everything that occurs radially within inside contains the very same things that were potentialized there is now becoming actualized. Our feelings, our thoughts, everything we do, including speech, everything that we will, that we deliberately decide upon, that we intentionally go after, that all existed within that singularity. And when you awaken to that, you experience what's called amazement. What is amazement? It's two words. A-maze. You are caught within this transfinite maze of existence, of Maya, where everything appears to be limited, right? Limited space, you can see only certain sections. Limited times, there are only certain spans that are events, and then those events change. Certain energies that commingle and then disappear, whether it's the food on your plate being transformed, or whether it's the linguistic transformations that take place in a conversation you have with someone else, as well as with your feelings. So what actually happens in terms of those aspects of doing, feeling, willing, and thinking, we can condense and just call it mind, will, life, and love. Now, these are all part of conscious being, and we referred to that. But if we look at pure being, now this arrow is showing the unity of these four aspects of the ingredients of reality, of conscious being, pure being, non-being, and partite being. So if we look over here in terms of being as the undifferentiated whole, and that reality is produced by a commingling of these four ingredients. And when these four ingredients are present, they have the ability, because of each of their functions, to produce existence. So it's conscious being that carves out of pure being by leaving, by making absent, leaving absent, or by determining an absence of what is going to remain as pure potential and what will not participate within partite being. So partite being actually is a condensation of a very small amount of energy or being, the majority of which is carved away. The carving away is by agency. And the agency that we speak of has the ability at once to observe and to perform. Right? Both actor and watcher. In fact, you can't watch anything unless you are acting to watch. And you can't act on anything unless you're watching what you're doing. That kind of interdependency is what we know as agency. And that is fully unfurled when we consider the self as the psychonaut, as the pilgrim, which will be after cognos. So each of these arrangements, these intuitive arrangements we have of the idea of self, gives us a further understanding of the world in which we live. And that understanding leads to happiness for ourselves. Mastering these intuitive arrangements of self within your own life for the benefit of others brings about contributions to the socioverse, to the creation of an intersubjective, intercultural reality that we as conscious beings build in concert with nature. Because nothing that we produced is supernatural in the sense that we're taking something and making, for instance, a car, and we're manufacturing it from elements that don't exist. No, we're manufacturing it from elements that have a concrete existence in the finite world. But all of the elements work together because they all participate within a single being. And the reason that we're seeing the world, the built world around us, emerge from the natural world as culture is because we as spiritual beings are moving still from that point of singularity through trans-infinity to the infinite boundary, which of course is an ever-receding boundary. It's asymptotic. And that's why within every tradition, when they're speaking about the unfurlment, the unfoldment, the self-realization that comes about when you exercise certain conscious forms of working with these energies and these aspects of self, the things that emerge are things that are part of the necessity of you as a spiritual being. And these necessities are Newman's. They're not physical needs. They're not like in Maslow's hierarchy. It's not, first of all, your survival needs, right, of food and warmth and clothing and shelter. And it's not the second in terms of security, that is having a shelter that's reliable and an environment which is not being invaded by warring parties or subject to animal attacks, etc., or disease-ridden. So you've got survival, you've got safety, and then you've got belongingness, a third level. And then, of course, you've got your esteem level, your self-esteem, and the respect you have in your community. And then the fifth level is self-actualization. And that's where you begin to take your psyche and your personality in hand, consciously, awakefully, and you begin to reshape it. Because everything that you've misshapen as self-cis formations, that is, these are formations that maintain a fixity of character in a mutable world. They're unresponsive, they're non-resilient, they're not adaptable. These are things which the human being can consciously engineer, and those engineering forms are called yoga, of course. So here we're dealing with the cosmos, and we're dealing with, it doesn't matter whether you are a microcosm or a minicosm or a macrocosm, you're a cosm, this whole thing. And all of this, in terms of the four aspects that constitute reality, go into the taking from infinity down to the finite, the finity, the particular, the aletheia, as I call it, where you have finite divided concrete existence at all its various levels. And remember, when we're talking about the various levels of existence, we're talking about dimensionalized existence that take the infinite and go right down to the physical level itself, to the rupic level of the organic and organismic forms we see around us, and as well as the subatomic levels of quantum mechanics, and even thinner than that. This actually here is the transfinite realm. And this is the realm that we are particularly concerned about in terms of transformation. So when we're talking about cis formations, we're talking about formations that tend to fixate you to the physical realm instead of opening you up to becoming a transductor a conscious transductor of the infinite into the finite. So when we were speaking about how does the space-time entity, causality continuum, come into being, we're actually asking the question of cosmogenesis. What's the causality of creation? And for that, we need to go to cosmic etiology and the three types of causation. And we referred to this last time. The first type of causation we're pretty well familiar with. This is an operative causation. It's production. It's where finite things are the causes that produce other finite things. So whether it's on the subatomic level, you're attempting to account for the transactions of energy in terms of causation, of what precludes and actually causes or is part of the supporting conditionality of the result, actually the effect. Because you can break production down. You can break it down into cause, effect, and then consequences, and then the result, the final result. Just take a billiard ball, for instance. If I am going to be the cause, and this, the efficient cause, the instrumental cause, when I hit the cue ball, boom, I cause an effect on that cue ball. That's the effect. What's the consequence? Well, the consequence is it takes off and it hits, it's a rim shot, and so it rebounds and it hits again at the other end of the table and it ticks the ball that I was aiming at. And that's all the consequence, the ramifications of that effect from the cause. The final result is that that ball falls in the corner pocket. That's production. And that's going on all around us, and it's not simply serial. Everything is happening, being processed here in parallel, as it were. But they are fixed in discontinuous states in which something emerges and then something submerges. And this is the nature of finitude and mutability. And it's always susceptible to change. The second type of causation, upon which production is actually dependent, because this is a transcendental condition, it's generation. And the best example of that is you yourself, the I and the me. Or is it the me and the I? But it's this. It's where you, as a subjectively thinking entity that is capable of ideation, think about yourself. Well, the moment you think about yourself, you take the very process and faculty that is doing the thinking, and you project it into an idea, a mental object. And when you color that object, you say, that's me. And somebody will say, well, if you were to describe you, what would you say? And to do that, you have to generate the idea of yourself. So you are at once the generator and the generatrix. That is, you have an active intelligence that projects the idea of what it means to be you onto the screen of your mental consciousness. So there are two things going on. There's the generator and there's the generated. And this is generative causation. This is something that happens everywhere that there's a cosm. It is the within. In Chardin's phrase, it's the within of things. I call it the purlieu, where, as opposed to this outer world, the milieu. And the milieu is defined as what? It's defined as where one finite thing can influence another finite thing, right? My body can influence this finite thing, right? I can influence this page by touching it. I can have all kinds of influences because there's a transitive activity taking place. Something that I originate as an agent, I can have an effect on in the outside world, and that's production. However, before that can even take place, I, as an active intelligence, am already involved in the creation of whatever I see out here as a subject-object relation, where I'm an embedded subject here, and the object seems to be extruded or outside of me, where in terms of my epistemic dialectic, my process of thinking always has an object of thought. It can be something from my sense environment, it can be something from my imagination, it can be a concept in which I've abstracted all the other differentials and particulars, and I'm only consider a generic concept such as redness or race or the elements of the atomic table, the periodic table. Those are all individual aspects of presented or partite being, every one of those. And they're part of what is considered the measured world, the world of manifestation, often referred to as the mother, the milieu, matter. All of this is Maya. All of this is the divided particular world around us from which pure being has been shaped into being existential. It's that which appears. That in which we are immediately involved in at a metacosmic level. And this is an important concept that we must understand if we are to see how we are actually integrated into this world. Because I am integrated into this world through the minicosms of my body. The minicosms of my body, the cells, the molecules, the atoms, all of it, right down to the subatomic particles themselves. All of it obeys the very same laws that the rest of the macrocosmic world obeys. It is my instrument as a conscious being that is totally in tune with the macrocosmic world. And we're talking about today, how does that attunement happen? And we says, well, first of all, We're looking at the finite world, we see it's produced. There are causes, effects, consequences, and results. And it's happening from a lot of different entities together in a causal universe in which all the laws of one, when they're affected, actually ramify in physical time and space. We said that that's based upon the generation as cause. And that is your causal reason. That's the crucis that occurs. And we talked about that. That's that whole metamorphic crux in which you have elements of the higher dimensions as well as the lower dimensions upon which we ground ourselves, all participating in the very preconditions that are the causes that bring about an effect. But standing below all of that is the emanation, causation. Causation, all three are necessary: emanation, generation, and production to have full creation. However, this is dependent upon that. These two are dependent upon emanation. And emanation is the basis of all. It's basically the identity of consciousness and being. That may sound like an astounding statement, but if you follow what we've been talking about, you'll find that the basis of being is consciousness itself. Consciousness in all its aspects of identity, will, love, mind, and life. It's not to say that all of that appears all at once perfectly. Remember the single granularity of the protile that is pre-physical, that is pre-psychical, that is pre-even spiritual before anything comes about. All contained in that, all of that. All the truths of science, all the truths of mathematics, all the truths of sociology, of religion, of art, of poetry. That is, as things as they are, as the mixing of the ingredients of reality, all four of them: conscious being, pure being, finite being, and non-being. So all three of these causational modalities are invested and bring about creation. You have to have a basis, and that's the Urlu. The Urlu I refer to as that realm of the spirit and the self in which you have an emergence, infinite emergence of the potential into the actual without diminution. In the epistic realm, where generational causation holds, we have here transfinite convergence without limitation. You can have another thought, and it's going to be accompanied by other feelings. And you can do this a transfinite number of times, which means you can do it without limit. Transfinity is nothing more than your experienced aspect of infinity. It's part of the infinite whole. It's carved out of the very same thing that everything else is carved out of. And what we're talking about here is understanding what it is that constitutes this external world. This external world doesn't explain itself. You are never going to be able to explain the universe as a singularity, which is pre-metaphysical, pre-physical, pre-metapsychical, pre-psychical. You will never be able to account for culture and nirvana and happiness and love and joy by considering this as simply material, devoid of all this. Being has within itself all the entities that will ever come about. Being has within itself as eternity all the times, the temporal modalities that will ever appear. Being has within itself as unobstructed infinite space the capability of containing absolutely anything. And being has within itself all the energies, which is the perfect source, the basis of all, from which things emanate. In terms of, this is intentionalized synergia. What I'm talking about is synthesis as being, taking that being and expanding it, taking it from infinity down to particular infinity, where the myopic world around us appears in all its multifarious glory and interaction. Here, I've dimensionalized the synergia so that when you're looking at pure impartite being, you can take a look at it and say, well, presence, pure being. Let's look at it in two dimensions. First dimension is it's transcendent. That is, it's beyond all description. You can never whatsoever describe pure being. As the mystics would say, it's ineffable. As scientists might say, it's inscrutable. Or it can be immanent. That is, being is that which participates in all finite things in order to give them, if you will, their connectivity, their ability to be causally connected with each other and have some influence, this transitive activity we talk about occurring out here, unlike the immanent activity that occurs in the psychical realm, in which I, as an agent, manufacture my own objects of experience, my feelings, what I'm going to do, my willings, all the thoughts I have. They're all a result of internal agency, of this generator and the generated that happens in the epistemic relation of the subject and the object. The basis is there, it's generated right at the psychical level of consciousness, and it inheres in you whether you think of it or not, just as pure consciousness inheres in us all, whether you pay attention to it or not. Paying attention is just a matter of, on that psychical realm, generating the idea at the moment. That's all. That's liminality. Everything subliminal below that, the feelings you've had, the experiences that you've piled up in terms of memories and the formations that predispose you to certain types of conduct, predictable conduct, fixated conduct. That's all subliminal. You're not paying attention to it. If you do in the psychical realm, you'll look at something that, for instance, a memory from the past, and you, as an active intellect, as an active agent at that psychical level of the soul or the psyche, will generate the corresponding thought. However, all of that, all of our individual thoughts, feelings, doings, willings, remember that they're going to converge transfinitely without limit. Right? In the same way that you have in the Irlu, in the primal basis of being, you have an ability for infinite emergence without diminution. There's no diminishing of the paraverse, which is, of course, what is subtending any universe, including ours. It's all here. There's no, what is here is everywhere. What is nowhere is also here. So if we were to take cause and entity and space and time and say, okay, in terms of present being, how would you characterize this infinite vector, and at the same time, this vector that particularizes into a unique event, a unique thing, a unique experience? Here I vectorized synergia. And let's just start off, first of all, with the concept of infinity and dimensionality. Infinity and dimensionality are two sides of the same coin, space. The infinity of space is nothing more than absolute dimensionality, going back into the presence of impartite, undividable, single being. From which, remember, hypothetically, the protylic singularity of the physicist is a representation of. That's in relation to space. And dimensionality are relative situations. Just like in terms of eternity, that's absolute creativity. In eternity, everything happens. There's nothing left out. Every possible creative thing, permutation and commutation and arrangement, and extra arrangement, and exponential arrangements, they're all accounted for in terms of eternity. But in terms of relative occasions, each one of these are an occasion of creativity where a particular creative something happens, right? I'm speaking creatively certain words, certain gesticulations. These are all finite. These are all situations, and situations from the angle of space, it's happening here in space. But from the angle of time, there are occasions. This is an occasion, this recording of this particular seminar that we're doing on the whole today. If we look in terms of totality, the absolute potency of entity, that leads to the concept of totality. Being is total. It includes everything. When we're talking about the universe, macrocosmically speaking, it includes everything. There's nothing outside of it. The paraverse is not a thing. So it's not inside of it, it's not outside of it. Remember, the paraverse doesn't have a center, doesn't have a circumference. The universe does. And the universe is an entity. And so therefore, its potency is going to be seen in relative qualifications. Certain things can be done in certain ways. Qualifications, heat and cold, there's a quality, right? Black and white, there's qualities of shades of gray in between. Red is a different quality than green. A C note, a middle C note, is a different quality than a D flat, or for that matter, than a color or a smell. These are all differences. These are all different qualia. These are all different ways that qualities are manifest in this particular world of ours. They converge down here, including the relative concatenations, that is, this seriality, this pancreas we were talking about, all these different cause, effect, consequence, result relationships are all what? They're all relative. They're relative applications of energy. What is energy? Right, it's either work performed, otherwise it's potential energy. Potential energy here, if we're absolute energy, that's purity. What is purity? It's the absence of distinction amongst any kinds of energy that creates friction, right? That creates influence, causation. There's no causation at the emanational level. It's all contained, it's all there, it's pure. It's as if you were to take every gross element and every subtle element and distill it out of the different material concatenations so that there's only, in the Einsteinian equation, only E, right? Everything's been reduced to E, energy. Well, that absolute energy is purity of impartite being, pure being. Once again, all of this we've captured and stratified and solidified conceptually in terms of the ontography of dimensionalized existence, where we move all the way from the atic plane of the infinite right down to the rupic plane, to the plane of material forms, as well as the quantum energies which underlie them. But here in the kamic realm, we have appetency and imagination. And in the monastic realm, we have both memory as well as the mental skills that we have acquired, whether these are your scientific knowledge, your cognitive skills, practical skills such as manipulating instruments when you're eating, or they can be social skills, or they can be creative skills. They're all there at the monastic plane. But the real dividing line that creates transfinity is the ahamkaric realm. Aham means I. It's the I maker. Ahamkara, kara means maker, aham means I. So it's the I maker. And it either makes the I in terms of its empirical element that relates to the personality and all of its finitude, the finitude of thoughts, of feelings, of energies in your body, as well as your transactions in this material plane. All of that that's been finitized is an experience that we call transfinity. That is, it's a finite set of occasions and situations and qualifications and concatenations that are occurring here and now in the finite world. However, they ramify in your psychical consciousness as something that is enduring. You don't lose your memories. You have different kind of memories, not just your episodic memories, but you have conceptual ones and semiotic ones that relate to words, their use, their references, as well as you have your biographic memory. But beyond that, you have an anamnesic memory, a memory of everything you as a conscious being are at the moment. That is, in Tantra, pratyabhijna, that is the great awakening to one's consciousness. In terms of the Eastern tradition and Western traditions, that's self-realization. And that's brought about, as we talked about. Self-transformation is a process of self-realization plus self-cultivation. What we're talking about at this moment and referring to is synergia, or the cultivation of this field of our universe through principles. And the principles that are used to achieve the synergia are, first of all, these principles, they're Ausic principles. These Ausic principles of cosmization allow the creation of the cosm. So here you have the cosm of existence. Take, for instance, you as an individual being. You as a cosm of existence, of course, there's a whole ocean out here of other cosms that are existing coincidentally with you. And that's why there will be the complexification of the finite environs. You don't just appear yourself, right? The number one doesn't appear in the mathematical world by itself without reference to two and all the numbers real and irreal between them, below them, around them, within them. It all happens at once. It's all within that singularity. All the mathematics. It's all there. What we discover is another matter. That's transfinite. Transfinity is peeling back the infinity of being. So when we're dealing with the cosm down here in terms of Maya, that is concrete, definable, intelligible, sensible, desirable, doable existence, achievable things, we see that it has a principle of complexification. That falls actually under the epistemic principles of holization. Every cosm that is created from these other principles becomes a whole with irreducible properties, so that the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. The way things are put together is as important as what gets put together. How they get put together, the elements, how they get put together, are put together under forms. And these forms are themselves essences. This is what we're talking about. If you didn't have the proper form of the material that goes into the creation of an automobile, you had different forms that were shaped different in essences. And all a shape is an essence locked in concrete form. But remember that essences are also colors and tones. Everything that takes form, that takes a shape. And that's why, in terms of the way that we as human beings look at these omniversal principles and how they fall out, we see it in this area here, Kamaloka, right? Here's the Rupaloka, Aletheia, the epistemic realm, become the empirical, where things are manifest finitely. And here's where we're talking about the entities, events, elements, essences, and energies. And for us, in terms of how we interpret, for instance, an energy, it's a totem. It's something that's built upon something else, like a totem pole. An energy never comes from nowhere and never leaves to nothing. An energy is always a transformation of an event from one state to another. And therefore, these states piled upon one another become totems. They don't disappear. What happened, happened. That was the causality that created this moment. So these are totems. And these totems, actually, related here, are the energies as we experience them. In the same way that times are what we experience of the events that happens in terms of the transformation from eternity into the momentary realities that we formulate into spans or episodes of time. So we see that in terms of the androgenetic triunity, which is ourselves as the microcosm, we're simply saying that we have both an agnostic and an empiric self. We have an agnostic self which is at one with the Urlu. Everything that you have as a purely conscious spiritual being is not divided from the Urlu. It is part of it. And not only is it part of it, not only is it synced to it, like some finite things might be synced, like in syncopated swimming, but it is the pre-established basis for any kind of synchronicity whatsoever. In other words, if we were to go back to our chart, it's actually the synchrony that we're talking about. The synchrony is to time what the syncosm is to space. If you were to take this moment and freeze the entire universe, that's the syncosm. It's like a photo of all the elements of the universe. In computer terminology, it's like taking an image. Boom, that's the syncosm. However, the very same syncosm, when looked at in terms of process and not structure, is the syncadena. And the syncadena is all the causational nexus that's taking place now. It's every individual entity that's influencing another, and it is all of these entities as they move in a continuous process with one another. That's syncadena. That's made possible only because of shunya, purity. Because there is no inherent existence. None of these cadena, that is these energies, none of the cadena, the energies that are surrounding us and that interact, are permanent. None of them are absolute. They're all dependent and relative on one another. None of them are simple. They're all composed. They're all produced from something, from other parts. And that's why you can drill down infinitesimally into what the minicosm is, all dependent on that relative hierarchy of the macrocosm, and then what constitutes a minicosm is dependent upon the microcosm that has dominance over it. Signoral rights of ousia, of being, if you will. So we are talking about several things at once, and it's easy to get confused as to what type of causation is taking place at what time, unless you remember a very simple formula. And you embody that formula. And that formula simply is that of your awareness, you have three elements that are always operative in any given time. And the way that you utilize these instruments are the way you utilize your trigonic self, spirit, soul, soma, pure consciousness. When you apperceive yourself, that is, you have an immediate apprehension and intuition of you. You are conscious of being conscious. You can call yourself to that anytime. The basis of you generating that moment in liminal reality, where you say, I am conscious of being consciousness, where you utilize that awakening mantra, what you are actually doing is generating the idea that you are conscious of being conscious. But what allows you to generate that idea is on the higher level of spirit, there is apperception. That is, you are always intuiting yourself and what you do. You're never out of the sight of yourself. That's apperception. And you have, on the psychical plane, the ability to take that natural apperception and pay attention to it. And that happens at the moment of reflection. And you say, I'm not thinking about myself. That's an active experience. But you appear as the experiencer, are the basis for this experiencing. Now, as a human being and being incarnated with a brain, you not only have that pneumic and spiritual level, you have that solar and psychical level, and you have, as participating as an embedded subject, an empirical level. And this I call the soma. This is your personality. This is you as a composite person. It's your thoughts and your willings and your feelings. It's your vitality as well as your physical body. And it even includes your stuff. All of that is a part of you. That is, it's part of what you're generating from yourself that you identify with and having a part of you, of your inner being. Whether you can capture that apperception as it occurs is a matter of meditation. But remember, in everything that we're talking about today, these three types of causality are present in terms of apperception, which is emanation causation. It's causation as emanation. Apperception, it's always going on. You're always emanating an intuition of yourself. Attention is that psychical element, aspect of consciousness in which you can focus as a subject on any particular object. That's the epistemic relation. And that's the basis as well as when you're here, you have a third kind of awareness, which is apprehension. Apprehension is where you as an embedded subject behold and can manipulate extruded objects. Objects that seem extruded from the energies that surround us and which I'm a part of. And as an extrusion, they solidify. And temporarily, they appear to be stable. But that's an illusion, an utter illusion. There is no stability. Everything is mutable in the finite realm. That's the basis of the finite realm. Remember, in the four ingredients of reality, that's the realm of changing. That's where change occurs. The changeless is with ontos and the apeiron, the infinite, eternity, infinity, totality, purity, unity. That's all part of that apeiron. When apeiron falls into form, we have the divided aspects. Then we see the entities, the events, the elements, the essences, and the energies as they come about and can mingle down in what I call morpha. And morpha, it's a thing event. My body is a morpha. Your body is a morpha. This is a morpha. This is a morpha. Anything that has a solidified material being is a morpha. And what is a solidified material being? Well, it's a being that is slowed down so that we, as microcosmic entities, can interact with the same elements on the same plane at the same time. And in terms of the ontography of dimensionalized existence, what we are talking about as matter on the lowest realm, or this rubric realm, is nothing but pure energy when it comes to infinity. So when Einstein is talking about E equals mc squared, he's talking about for the condensation of that energy into matter. And that sounds a lot like the pre-Socratics, who used to talk about the condensation and rarefication of different elements in order to create reality. So in terms of the cosmos as the universe is dependent upon the tricosm. There's the macrocosm, then there's the individual parts, but these individual parts themselves are composed of elements and parts. And these are the minocosmic elements over which I have sovereignty as a signoral self. And just as I have an ahamkaric self, an I maker that has a sense of myself as being myself, as a mental, psychical being, I also have a sense of a signoral self. And a signoral self is a self that actually does what? They are the selves that rule over the minicosm. So the minicosm is my point as a microcosm to completely experience the macrocosm in its finite terms. All these minicosmic elements that constitute my body are of one and the same principles and laws governing all the transformations of energy in this universe. That's why it's a causal universe. A causal continuum as well as a space and time continuum. The causal continuum is a continuum of entities in interaction within space, unfolding according to time. So, in terms of the trigonic self, we are speaking about those very elements, and I've eliminated the octahedron for the moment, just to concentrate on these four elements of the epistic self, the trigonic self. The trigonic self I've often referred to as the archaic self. And the archaic self is the self that, in Trinitarianism, it's one substantial entity. None of these, pneuma, psyche, or person, that is your Gnostic self, or your epistic self, or your empiric self, none of those exist independently of one another. They are all parts substantially of the same archaic self. They function as a single unified self. We break it down here because that's the way reality is beheld. We perceive it either directly through apperception, we perceive it either through attention or through apprehension. All of it is occurring at the same time, but how much you generate at the epistic self level, in the epistic relation, where you are generating the ideas, that is the pivot. That's the aperture. That is, if you will, the moment of eternal opportunity. And it is that center that is grasped upon in meditation. In fact, meditation means to be at the center. Next time, we're going to be talking about the expanded human nature. That is one's cognostic constitution. The creation of the cosmos and the cosmos can be understood at that microcosmic level, and that is where we look at the self as the mind, as conscious being, as the person. And next time when we look at that, we'll take into account the three different worlds of finite, transfinite, and infinite. And you'll see here that I've related these to different concepts from religion, philosophy, science, psychology. And actually going into this is to unfurl the three types of causation of emanation, generation, and production. And we'll do that next time, and we'll begin with a consideration of the human being in terms of their triliminal consciousness. We touched upon it just briefly today when we were speaking about liminal consciousness there, where there's the actual experiencing of the presencing of yourself. At that point, there's the noesis and there's the noema. There's you as the generator and as the idea generated about yourself as me. That fundamental level of liminal consciousness is not always abided in. We're not always focused and always generating consciously ideas at a psychical level in our souls. What we are often doing is we are beset by our involvement within the world and paying attention to the world by way of apprehension. So The world of apprehension depends upon the world of attention, and the world of attention depends upon the world of apperception. So, until the next time that we meet, behave when you must. Be good. Whenever you can. But above all else, be yourself.